Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's top 10 most overrated episodes of Star Trek. In this video, I will count down what I consider to be the most overrated episodes in the entire Star Trek franchise. So, I gotta hit that I very hard because this is just my opinion. It's not taking anything else into account, popular opinion or whatever, although it's taking popular opinion into account the stuff I think is rated too highly. But this list is, of course, just my opinion, so take that as you will. Now, and it is always tricky to do an overrated list because, and which is actually, this is an idea I've had for a long time, but I've been pushing it off because it's a video that's most likely to get a lot of disagreement and complaints because basically by calling something overrated, you are saying, I think everyone else is wrong. And that is a bit of a tricky thing to do. But, as I said, just my opinion, just coming from my perspective, I think these episodes are getting a bit too much love, a bit more than they deserve. Now, I want to make something clear at the start of my top 10 how I'm defining overrated. Basically, what I'm saying is all these episodes on my top 10 list I do like to one degree or another. In fact, if I absolutely hate an episode, then that actually disqualifies it for this list, even though I think, even though if I think people like it way more than they should. Tuvix! Excuse me. Because I'm doing a whole other list for the top 10 episodes that I hate that people seem to like for some reason, and that episodes like the one I just coughed out would be more applicable to that list, so I'm leaving them off of this list. This list is just going to be for episodes that I like, that I think are good, but maybe not that good. Like, they just people get a bit too enthused for these episodes, in my humble opinion. Alright, so let me start off my list with a list of honorable mentions that didn't quite make my top 10. First honorable mention I want to mention is the 6th season Voyager episode Lifeline. This is the episode that features Robert Picardo playing Dr. Zinnemann in old man makeup, where apparently he's dying from a disease, and the doctor's sent from the Delta Quadrant to the Alpha Quadrant by, magic or whatever to try to help him, and he's being an asshole about it the whole time. This is a really well-loved episode, and I never figure out why. It doesn't really make sense to me why they aged Robert or Dr. Zinnemann up for, even though he was shown in previous episodes to look exactly like the Doctor in the same age, including the Deep Space Nine episode. It's funny how he aged 20 years over 1 year, but whatever. Point is, I didn't really care much for Dr. Zinnemann, and the fact he was being a dick to the Doctor and he had to prove himself to be his son or whatever felt very contrived, and I didn't buy the storyline. Oh, it has Barclay and Counselor Troyan, so I guess we're supposed to go crazy over it. I don't know. Anyway, next honorable mention is the Andorian incident, first season Enterprise episode. No first season Enterprise episode deserves to get a lot of praise, first of all. Just throwing that out there. Secondly, this one is just fine. Like, it's not, I don't really see what's so great about it. I think people just go a bit crazy over the fact that we see the Andorians for the first time since the original series. I mean, we got little glimpses of them here and there, but this is the first time we fully see them. And, Jeffrey Combs is always great. He's great in the role of Shran, so people go a little bit crazy that, but I mean, especially if you're looking over the whole history of Enterprise once it's finished, Jeffrey Combs had much better episode appearances as Shran than this one. This one was like average at best. And then you have this other Andorian guy who's like being really creepy to the Paul and shit that we're out, which like just makes me cringe, and I can't stand that. And overall, it's like Archer decides to visit this Vulcan monastery for no good reasons, out of the blue. Hey, let's go hang out there, and the Vulcans are like, go away. And he doesn't take the hint, and I don't know. And I've also heard the argument put out there that it's normal for superpowers to spy on each other, so Archer kind of fucked up by exposing them, the Vulcans. But regardless, this episode isn't that good. It's okay at best. Anyway, next, final honorable mention is going to be Strange New Worlds episode Memento Mori. Now, I can hear the collective gasp as I say that, because I've heard a lot of people say this was the best episode of Strange New Worlds, or one of the best. I didn't hate this episode. I liked it. In fact, as I said, only episodes I like make this list. And in fact, I really liked this one. But I don't think it was anywhere near the best episode of the season. The first season of Strange New Worlds. I think that's clearly the season 1 finale. It was like far superior to this episode. Not that this episode was bad. It was intense having the Gorn chase them, and they're going through the start, and it was great seeing Pike use his abilities and build a relationship with La'an. But I don't really think there was much more to this episode than that. And I think some of the scenes with like Spock having the mind meld with La'an were kind of unnecessary, and the whole fact of she bringing up her brother who died. I don't know. It's just, this episode's good, but it's nowhere near that good, at least in my humble. Anyway, let's get into my top 10 most overrated episodes of Star Trek, and we'll start with my number 10, Message in a Bottle, 4th-season Voyager episode. Now, I looked this episode up on IMDb way back in the day, and I think actually still to this day is in the top 5 highest rated Voyager episodes on IMDb, and I've heard a lot of people say that they love this episode. This is the episode when the Doctor goes to the Alpha Quadrant to try to send a message and finds that the ship he's on has been taken over by Romulans. He teams up with that ship's EMH, played by Andy Dick, and so comedy things ensue, and they manage to defeat the Romulans. Now, I did include this episode in a list I did for the funniest episodes in Star Trek, because I did find this episode amusing. I did like the interactions between Robert Picardo and Andy Dick. I think they were kind of hilarious how the EMH kept trying to shut himself off. Like, Andy Dick's performance actually did really work for me in this episode. But one of the best episodes of Voyager? No, I'm sorry, not at all. It's funny, it's entertaining, but it's not one of the best. There's so many better Voyager episodes than this one. This one is pretty straightforward. 2 holograms fighting off Romulans. And by the way, it still bothers me that the Romulans took over the ship and not the Cardassians. It would have made much more sense for the Star Trek universe to have it, because at this moment they were at war. Starfleet was at war with the Cardassians and the Dominion. Now, I understand why Star Trek Voyager would not want to include the Dominion, which is strictly a Deep Space Nine villain, and never been mentioned on Voyager. And it's at the time Deep Space Nine was not that popular, so they would rather tap into a more recognizable alien. But the Cardassians are recognizable, and they would have made way more sense. They've been mentioned on Voyager a lot already. And they were, as Starfleet was at war with the Cardassians. They were not at war with the Romulans. In fact, they even mentioned this in the throwaway line. Oh, the Romulans refused to help us in our war with the Dominion. And the Doctor's like, what are you talking about? It's like, yeah, it doesn't care. It doesn't matter. It's just another show that we don't care about. And that's dumb. That irritates me. But anyway, that's kind of neither here nor there, because even without that flaw, this episode's still overrated. Anyway, let me go ahead and get into my number 9 most overrated episode of Star Trek, and I'm going back to modern Trek for this one. And again, I'm going to hear the collective gasp. Is the Star Trek Lower Decks episode Wej Duj, I believe is how you pronounce it. It's Klingon for 3 ships, apparently. And I remember I recently did a top 20 favorite episodes of Modern Trek, and I got a couple comments saying, I'm surprised you didn't include this episode. Well, don't be surprised, because I don't think this episode's that good. In fact, I'm quite amazed that so many people like it so much and call it one of the best, if not the best, of Lower Decks, which I think is very far from. I mean, it's not a bad episode, don't get me wrong. It's certainly, I would put it in like, if I was going to rank all the episodes of Lower Decks, this would probably, make it past the halfway point. But it's definitely not, it wouldn't be top 5, probably not even top 10, because here's the thing. This episode was just saying the same joke over and over and over again, particularly in the Vulcan storyline. The Vulcan storyline is, oh, look, the Vulcans are being all stoic and calm, and yet her superiors are calling her reckless and outrageous. Isn't that funny? Because comparatively speaking, for Vulcans, they're being outrageous, and so why are you showing so much emotion when they're being flat? Isn't that funny? Let's tell that joke over and over and over and over and over and over again. And I frankly never found that joke that funny to begin with. So I think this is actually one of the least funny episodes of Lower Decks. Now, the Klingon storyline I did find a little bit more funny, such as the guy telling his captain that his tar gave a glorious bowel movement like that. That was kind of funny, but still. And then the gimmick of this episode, of course, is very obvious that the different characters in the Vulcan and Klingon ships were behaving like our Starfleet characters, main characters in Lower Decks would. Okay. So what? I mean, I get it, but I don't see why people go so crazy over it and think it's like cleverest thing ever. I don't know. Anyway, let me get into the number 8 on my list, and that's Relics from Star Trek Next Generation. The Scotty episode. Look, it's Scotty. Let's rate this episode high and call it one of the top 5 episodes of Star Trek Next Generation because fucking Scotty is in it. No. Just because that is the cheapest thing. Just because you chuck in a fan favorite from the original series. It doesn't make it one of the best episodes of the Next Generation. Now, to be fair, this episode gets more praise than Unification because that scene is kind of a dud, even though it features Spock. But, even though this is a better use of a cameo from original series character, does not make it a really great episode. The plot, I did a review for it. The plot of this episode is very contrived. They come up, people treat Scotty like they don't give a shit about him because the plot requires it. But in actual real life, or not real life, but if it was going to stay true to the characters as they've been established on Next Generation, everyone loves the fucking hero worship, the original series cast. So they'd all be going crazy. They'd all be gathering in huge crowds in 10-4 and everything and listening to Scotty tell stories, but instead they all ignore him and act like he's dead meat because the fucking plot requires it. Also, LaForge turns into a total dickhead because the plot requires it to. And then they introduce this concept of this Dyson sphere and do absolutely nothing with it. So, I don't know. This episode is average at best. At best. I don't care if fucking Scotty's in it. It's still not that good. Does not deserve to be on any top 10 list. Anyway, let me get into my number 7 most overrated episode, and that is Space Seed from the original series. Khan. Whoop-de-fucking-do. That's the only reason why people like this episode is because Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. No other reason. They're like, oh, this is the episode that was built up to Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. So let's call it one of the best episodes of the original series. Even though the episode itself, not that special. It's average at best. It's just another original series episode the concept of having a Superman from 1992 continues the tradition of Star Trek overestimating how far technology would advance in the future. But anyway, I don't know. A genetically enhanced villain who takes over the Enterprise, and Kirk refuses to comply, so Khan throws him in a laundromat. I don't know. It's fine. It's okay, but it's nowhere near one of the best episodes of the original series. And as I said, people only go crazy over this because it led to the singular best movie of Star Trek. But that still doesn't make this episode great just because someone 20 years or 15 years later, however many years later, decided to make the best movie using a character who also happened to appear in this episode. And Ricardo Montalban overacting just like Shatner. I don't see what's so great about that. And also a lot of sexual harassment that, the way Khan treats MacGyvers and then they're seen as being in love at the end of this episode kind of makes me a little sick, but whatever. Anyway, episode's not that good. So, let me get into number 6 on my overrated list, and that's going to be The Way of the Warrior from Star Trek Deep Space Nine. Now, a lot of people put this in their top 10s or top 20s, and they've been surprised when I haven't done so. And I've heard a lot of people say that this is one of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine. One person I know even called it the quintessential episode of Deep Space Nine that kind of has the most feels like Deep Space Nine. I thought it was okay. I was kind of against the whole concept of them making the Klingons the adversaries of season 4, which I've been on the record for repeatedly. However, to be fair, I also stated that this episode could have still been a good standalone episode had they just made this a single occurrence instead of creating this whole conflict between the clans after this, which they definitely should not have done. And it was kind of like, just a way to bring Worf onto Deep Space Nine, which, I thought Worf was fine on Deep Space Nine. Like, I had no issue with him being there, but I still kind of feel like, even throughout the series' entire run, that he never really, really, really fit in there. Except for his relationship with Jadzia. Other than that, I don't know. I feel like I don't think it was a bad thing they brought Worf on, but I didn't think it was entirely necessary either. It was kind of just a ratings boost. The way the ratings were failing, so they wanted to bring on the Next Generation character to boost the ratings, and I think it worked. But it doesn't make this a good episode. And the conflict, like the Klingons trying to destroy the station and all the battle scenes and all that, were done better in the Dominion War, especially if you're looking at the show in retrospect once it's been finished. You can just and I wasn't that crazy over like Garrick and Quark's talk about root beer that people seem to love. I actually think that was kind of dumb because root beer is awesome. Anyway, but no, that's not why. But still, I didn't think that was that big of a deal. And Ducat's kind of acting like their friend, which annoys the fuck out of me because he's a freaking Hitler supervillain that should not be anyone's friend ever. Yeah. And so, I mean, as I said, I like this episode. It's a lot of fun, but nowhere near one of the best episodes of Deep Space Nine, in my humble. Anyway, let's get into my number 5 most overrated episodes of Star Trek, and next we'll get to The Trouble with Tribbles from the original series, which when I was growing up, they would do these top 10s where Star Trek fans would vote on the top 10 best episodes of the original series, and this would always be number 1. Every single time. Number 1, Trouble with Tribbles, and so many people made such a big deal. They buy all these little toy Tribbles and everything. And to be fair, as I said, all episodes on this list I like, and this was a good sort of, I like the chemistry between all the characters that they had, and I said before that they had all of the characters in this episode, although I don't. That's not true because Sulu wasn't in this episode. But the characters they did have, like Horror and Chekhov all got more screen time than they usually did, and they had that scene with Scotty, having a bar fight with a clan. That was a lot of fun, and Kirk's reaction to the obstinate bureaucrat asshole, that was fun too. But overall, this episode should not be considered, never be considered the best episode of the original series. Never. When you got episodes like City on the Edge of Forever and Mirror Mirror, and this, what's the other one? God, I can't even remember the name of it. But anyway, all those great episodes. A Taste of Armageddon. That's the one I'm thinking of. Anyway, you have all these great episodes, and this one's just okay. It's got fuzzy balls of fur that purr, and I did make a big deal about how there's other episodes that people act like they're horrible and they hate that's actually good. Alternative factor. Because it's too smart for them and they'd rather see little balls of fur that purr. I mean, what's the big deal? Oh, look, they're so cute. They just got the prop department to put a ball of fur and they added sound effects of it purring in post. So what? Like, I really don't see the big deal about this. As I said, it's a funny episode with great character chemistry, but that's it. It doesn't make it one of the best of the original series. Not by a long shot. Anyway, let's next get into my number 4 most overrated episode of Star Trek, and that is The Measure of a Man. Now, again, I hear a gasp after every episode I name in this list, which is the point. But to be fair, I do think I've been on record saying that this is the best episode of the first and second seasons of Next Generation, and I stand by this. This is the singular best episode of those first 2 seasons. But those first 2 seasons weren't good. And I stand by this. I heard someone recently try to make an argument that season 2 of TNG was actually quite good. No, it wasn't. The show did not get good until season 3, and I stand by that, because it still had that cheeseball feel to it, even in this episode. Now, so being the best episode of 2 terrible seasons does not make this the best episode of the show. To me, this does not deserve to be in the top 5, top 10, not even the top 20. I think I had this in my top 30, to be fair, but not a top 20. And I've recently saw top 10 where this was their number 1. They called this the number 1 best episode of TNG. But here's the thing: even though it has great Picard speeches in it, I will give you that, and it has that great conflict of, fighting for Data's rights, which has a lot of social commentary to make. That's very powerful. But it also features Riker being being forced to be the opposing counsel for no good reason. Like, the whole plot line makes no sense. It has that storyline with the judge being like an old lover of Picard, where I totally don't buy that. and they're bickering back and forth is kind of annoying and doesn't help anything. And Bruce Maddox acts like a mustache-twirly villain. Well, good in this episode. So, don't get me wrong, still like this episode. As I said, it's in my top 30 of TNG, but it's definitely not top 5 material, definitely not number 1 material, because it does have that. It is tainted by that second season cheese that TNG had. And more to the point, there's a much better version of this episode that is one of the best episodes of TNG, and it's called The Offspring. This dealt with the issue of android rights in a much more nuanced and better way. It didn't have that second season cheese, and it also had great Picard speeches, in my opinion, even better Picard speeches, and it had a very emotional, powerful ending with Data losing his daughter that brings me to tears, which this episode lacks. So it's not as good as The Offspring. Plain and simple. Anyway, let's next get into my number 3 most overrated episode of Star Trek, and that is Q Who. Again, another second season episode that this episode and Measure of Man were in IMDb's top 5. They had 2 season 2 episodes. There should be 0 season 2 episodes in the top 20, let alone the top 5. Now, this episode was really overrated because I don't even think it's that good. Honestly, I give it a 5 out of 10. It's okay. It is mediocre at best. But it's got the Borg in it. It's the first episode with the Borg, so we gotta go crazy because we all love the Borg. But it really, I think it's a sloppy written episode, particularly the Q element. I thought the Borg are a good concept. They were very creepy, particularly in this episode, but they could have been introduced way better than this. If you read some of the behind the scenes, they had different ideas on how to introduce the Borg, and they had this different idea on a Q episode to do that was actually going to be combined with the episode Time Squared, but they kind of scrapped that and they decided to haphazardly at the last second combine these two ideas, and I don't think it works. I think it's very clear it doesn't work. Why is Guinan doing this to Q like she has powers? Don't throw season 2 of Picard in my face because fuck that season. Anyway, and that whole thing doesn't make any sense. How Q and Guinan have this adversary, and Q's motivation in this episode doesn't make any sense. Why he wants to join the crew, so he tosses them out to the other side of the galaxy where 18 people were killed and be like, oh, and then he all of a sudden he doesn't give a fuck about joining the crew anymore. Like, none of that makes any sense. So this is, yes, the Borg are creepy in this episode. Yes, it's very suspenseful, but the whole framing device, the whole plot structure of this episode is a mess. A mess. So it's okay at best. It's not in the top 5, not by a long shot. Anyway, speaking of the Borg, let me get into my one. If you're familiar with my channel, you probably know what's coming. If you're not, this is going to be really irate over this. My number 2 most overrated episode of Star Trek is The Best of Both Worlds. Now, granted, I do like this episode way better than Q-Who. I think that this episode is top 20 material for me. I give it a 9 out of 10. I think this episode's amazing, but here's the thing. The majority of top 10s has this as its number 1. And it's usually, I don't think I've ever seen any other top 10 other than mine where this was not in the top 3. Maybe top 5 for some, but it's almost a shoo-in for the top 3, if not number 1. There's so many top 10s out there that call this the singular best episode of The Next Generation, and it is one of the most highly regarded episodes. I mean, they made a whole film, First Contact, based off of the popularity of this episode, which they referenced heavily in that film. So this is by far seen as one of the most iconic, if not the most iconic episode of The Next Generation, and I don't think it's quite that good. And I know this goes against popular opinion. People want to come for me with their torches and pitchforks over saying this, but I really gotta speak because I don't think that storyline with Shelby, I did not like that storyline. The Shelby going to Riker, you're in my way. And I felt like the first part was too much build up, and the second part, maybe not as satisfying as a resolution as it could have been. And Michael Piller, who wrote the fucking thing, even thought the same thing, that they didn't do that good of a job in concluding the storyline because Data, just tells the Borg to sleep and the whole ship blows up. Really? I mean, could you imagine that shit happening in like a First Contact movie or Voyager? Because I couldn't, and that's not because those things sucked, which they did, but because that's just silly. That's too easy. That's too much of an easy way to defeat the Borg. And I felt like, and the whole battle of the second episode, of course, occurs off screen because they don't have the money to do it. And the episode itself dealt more with Riker becoming, having to deal with his becoming a captain, being challenged by Shelby. And it's funny because people tend to forget about that and say, like, oh, this is such a great Picard story when he's captured by the Borg and has to force his humanity and has to face up to the fact that he's killing all these people. But actually none of that happened in this episode, really. That was dealt with more in the follow-up called Family. This episode was all about Riker for the most part. And no one really talks about this. I don't know. And I don't get me wrong, I think the Riker's character story was strong, which is why I give this episode 9 out of 10. But I don't think it's the best thing ever. And honestly, and I've said this before, I feel like if you're going to look at the best Next Generation, action is not what it does best. Action suspense is not what it does best. Now, granted, this is probably the best example of action suspense in the Next Generation, which is, again, why it's top 20 for me. But it's action and suspense is not what the Next Generation does best. Next Generation does drama, does speeches, episodes like The Inner Light, episodes like Tapestry with weird sci-fi concepts, episode like Darmok. All of those episodes, that's what TNG does good. This action and suspense is not what it does good. Even though this is the best example of action suspense, it's not what TNG at its best. So I don't think this should be considered the best episode of TNG. Sorry. Anyway, now let me get into my number one most overrated episode of Star Trek. And that is Trials and Tribble-ations from Deep Space Nine. Now look, did I enjoy this episode? Was it fun? Was it like a good accomplishment for special effects to so seamlessly, especially in the mid-90s, so seamlessly put modern day characters like DS9 crew, Sisko, Dax, and all of them in an episode of Trouble with Tribbles and it come out so seamlessly? Yes, very impressive. Very fun. It is a great tribute episode. And there's some good character, just like the original Trouble with Tribbles, there's some good character interactions as well. But it's a novelty episode. It's a tribute episode. It is not anywhere near the best episode of Deep Space Nine, which is what a lot of people call it. You look in a lot of top 10s, and this would be number one. Now, granted, those top 10s are usually fan voted, and so usually people who've never seen an episode of Deep Space Nine just go to watch Kirk, and so they call it the best episode without realizing how great the show is. But even in other top 10s that do know how good Deep Space Nine, and this somehow still makes it in there, which it definitely should not, just because they're overwhelmed by the nostalgia and oh look, it's Kirk and Sisko interacting, isn't that cool? Yeah, it's a little fun tribute, but this to me, top 50, not even top 40, not top 30, not top 20, and definitely not top 10. At the best, this is top 50. Even that, I think, is being too generous. Maybe even top 60 would be. It's an okay episode. Like, the plot of this episode makes no sense. It's obviously just contrived bullshit just so they could have Sisko and them interact with Kirk and crew, which is fine. That's fine for a tribute episode. Because the point isn't the plot, of course, and I've heard that argument before, and it's true. The point isn't the plot, but that limits how good this episode can be if the point's not the plot. If the point's just to have a fun little tribute, then that's all it ever is, and that's all it will ever be, and it's good for that, but that is nowhere near the conversation of best episodes of Deep Space Nine. Nowhere near. Deep Space Nine is the best Star Trek show, and it's good for all these strong character dramas, intense suspense, action scenes, really like fleshed out characters, really intense commentary like past tense, duet, really characters, stories that really get in the mind of characters like In the Pale Moonlight. Like, these are the bread and butter of what Deep Space Nine does in those like Dominion War arcs, which were fucking amazing. That is the best of Deep Space Nine. This is just a fun little tribute to the original series. Nowhere near the conversation of best episodes. Nowhere near. Anyway, so those are my top 10 most overrated episodes of Star Trek. Thank you so much for watching. You can leave your angry comments in the comment below. As I said, I'll reiterate, this is all just my opinion, and I'm in fact saying, going against the popular opinion is the whole point of this video. But anyway, if you did enjoy this video, be sure to check me out. Check out my channel for many more Star Trek videos, as well as I cover many other shows. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.